No man of universal fame has had an end similar to Napoleon's. An eagle, he was given a rock, on the point of which he remained in the sunlight till his death, in full view of the whole world. Now, therefore, that, severed from his time, his history is ended, and his epic legend commencing, let us go to see him die. Let us leave Europe. Let us follow him beneath the sky of his apotheosis. The seas where his ships have struck sail will point out to us the spot of his disappearance. At the extremity of our hemisphere, says Tacitus, is heard the hissing sound made by the dipping sun. Juan da Nova, the Portuguese navigator, was wandering through the waters separating Africa from America. In 1502, on the 21st of May, St Helena's Day, she being the mother of the first Christian emperor, he discovered an island in latitude 16 degrees south and longitude 6 degrees west. He landed there and named it after the day of its discovery. Having visited the island over several years, the Portuguese abandoned it. The Dutch established themselves there and then deserted it for the Cape of Good Hope. The British East India Company seized it. The Dutch took it back briefly in 1673, but the British occupied it once more and stayed there. "500 whites, 1,500 blacks, mingled with mulattoes, Javanese and Chinese, compose the population of the island. Jamestown is its town and its harbour. Before the British were masters of the Cape of Good Hope, the company's fleets returning from India put in at Jamestown. The sailors spread their cheap goods at the foot of the cabbage palms. The mute and solitary forest changed once a year into a noisy and populous market. The climate of the island is healthy but rainy. That dungeon of Neptune, which is only 7 or 8 leagues in circumference, attracts the ocean vapours. The tropical sun drives away every breathing thing at noonday, forces the very gnats into silence and rest, obliges men and beasts to hide themselves. The billows are illumined at night by what is called the phosphorescent light, a light produced by myriads of insects whose loves, electrified by the storms, kindle upon the surface of the deep the illuminations of a universal wedding. The shadow of the island, dark and motionless, reposes amid a moving plain of diamonds. On the 15th of October, the Northumberland was abreast of St Helena. The passenger mounted on deck. He had difficulty in discovering an imperceptible black speck in the bluish immensity. He took a spyglass. He surveyed that particle of earth as he might formerly have surveyed a fortress in the middle of a lake. He saw the small town of St James enchased in scarped rocks. Not a wrinkle in that barren face, but a gun hung from it. They seemed to wish to receive the captive according to his genius. On the 17th of October 1815, Napoleon touched the rock, his mausoleum, even as, on the 12th of October 1492, Christopher Columbus touched the New World, his monument. There, says Walter Scott, at the entrance to the Indian Ocean, Napoleon was deprived of the means of making a second Avatar, or incarnation on earth. Before being moved to the residence of Longwood, Napoleon occupied a hut at Briars, near Balcomb's cottage. On the 9th of December, Longwood, hurriedly enlarged by the carpenters of the British fleet, received its guest. The house, situated on a mountain upland, consisted of a drawing room, a dining room, a library, a study, and a bedroom. It was not much. General Gourgaud, Monsieur and Madame de Montalon, with their children, Monsieur de Lascaz, and his son camped out, provisionally in tents. Monsieur and Madame Bertrand installed themselves at Hut's Gate, a rough cottage placed on the boundary of the grounds of Longwood. Napoleon had a stretch of sand 12 miles long as his exercise ground. Centuries surrounded that space, and lookout men were posted on the highest peaks. The lion could extend his walks further, but in that case he had to consent to allow himself to be watched by one of the British bestiary. 2 camps defended the excommunicated enclosure. At night, the circle of the sentries was drawn in round Longwood. At 9 o'clock, Napoleon, confined, could no longer go out. The patrols went their rounds. Horsemen on vedette, foot soldiers placed here and there kept watch in the creeks and in the ravines which ran down to the sea. 2 armed brigs cruised, one to leeward, the other to windward of the island. What precautions to guard one man in the midst of the seas! After sunset, no boat could put to sea. The fishing boats were numbered, and at night they remained in harbour under the responsibility of a lieutenant in the navy. The sovereign general-in-chief, who had summoned the world to his stirrup, was called upon to appear twice a day before a junior officer. The emperor in exile did not submit to that call. When, by good luck, he was able to avoid the sight of the officer on duty, that officer would not have dared to say where and how he had seen that man, whose absence was more difficult to prove to the universe than his presence. Sir George Cockburn, the author of those severe regulations, was replaced by Sir Hudson Lowe. Then began the bickerings about which all the memoirs have told us. If one were to believe those memoirs, the new governor must have been of the family of the enormous spiders of St Helena and the reptiles of those woods in which snakes are unknown. Britain was lacking in nobility, Napoleon in dignity. His life at Longwood was regulated in this way. He rose at uncertain hours. Monsieur Marchand, his valet, read to him when he was in bed. After rising in the morning, he dictated to Generals Montholon and Gourgaud, and to the son of Monsieur de Lascaz. He breakfasted at 10 o'clock, rode on horseback or drove until about 3, returned indoors at 6, and went to bed at 11. He affected to dress as he is painted in his portrait by Isabey. In the morning, he wrapped himself in a caftan and wound a madras handkerchief round his head. Some of the British travellers, who had lately admired or who were on their way to see the marvels of the Ganges, visited another marvel on their road. India, accustomed to conquerors, had one chained at her gates. Napoleon allowed these visits with reluctance. He consented to receive Lord Amherst on the latter's return from his Chinese embassy. Admiral Sir Pulteney Malcolm he liked. "Does your government mean," he asked him one day, "to detain me upon this rock until my death day?" The Admiral replied that he feared so. "Then my death will arrive soon." "I hope not, monsieur. I hope that you will survive to record your great actions. They are so numerous that the task will ensure you a long life." The various travellers remarked that not the least trace of colour appeared in Napoleon's cheeks. His head resembled a marble bust whose whiteness had been slightly yellowed by time. Not the smallest trace of a wrinkle was discernible on his brow, nor an approach to a furrow on any part of his countenance. His soul seemed at peace. This apparent calm gave rise to the belief that the flame of his genius had taken flight. His manner of speaking was slow. His expression was benign and almost kindly. Sometimes he would shoot forth piercing glances. But that state soon passed. His eyes became veiled and sad. Napoleon was approaching his end. Devoured by an internal wound, envenomed by sorrow, he had borne that wound in the thick of prosperity. It was the only legacy which he had received from his father. The rest came to him from God's munificence. Already he tallied 6 years of exile. He had needed less time to conquer Europe. He remained almost always indoors and read Ossian in Cesarotti's Italian translation. Everything saddened him under a sky beneath which life seemed shorter. When Napoleon went out, he passed along rugged paths, lined with aloes and sweet-scented broom. He walked among gum trees with their sparse flowers, which the regular winds had made lean to the same side, or hid himself in the thick mists which hugged the ground. He was seen seated at the foot of Diana's Peak, Flagstaff, or Ladder Hill, gazing on the sea through the gaps in the mountains. Before him stretched the ocean, which on the one side bathes the coasts of Africa, on the other the American shores, and which goes, like a river without banks, to lose itself in the southern seas. Who can tell the thoughts of that Prometheus, alive as he was, yet torn by death, when, his hand pressed to his aching breast, he turned his gaze over the billowing waves. Napoleon, forgetting one of his own thoughts, "Not having given myself life, I shall not rob myself of it," spoke of killing himself. He also did not remember his order of the day with regard to the suicide of one of his soldiers. He had sufficient hope in the attachment of his companions in captivity to believe that they would consent to suffocate themselves with him in the smoke from a brazier. The illusion was great. Such are the intoxications of a long domination. But, in the case of Napoleon's impatiences, we must think only of the degree of suffering he had attained. Monsieur de Lascaz, having written to Lucien on a piece of white silk, in contravention of the regulations, received the orders to leave St Helena. His absence increased the void around the exile. On the 18th of March, 1817, Lord Holland in the House of Lords made a motion on the subject of the complaints forwarded to Britain by General Montholon. "It will not be considered by posterity," he said, "whether Napoleon has been justly punished for his crimes, but whether Great Britain has acted in that generous manner which becomes a great country." Lord Bathurst opposed the motion. Cardinal Fesch sent 2 priests from Italy to his nephew. The Princess Borghese begged the favour of being allowed to join her brother. "No," said Napoleon, "I would not have her witness my humiliation and the insults to which I am subjected." That beloved sister did not cross the seas. She died in the regions where Napoleon had left his reputation. Schemes for his abduction were formed. A Colonel Latapy, at the head of a band of American adventurers, designed a descent on St Helena. Johnson, a resolute smuggler, meditated an attempt to carry off Napoleon by means of a submarine vessel. Young lords entered into these plans. People plotted to break the chains of the oppressor. Why should they have left the liberator of the human race to die in irons without a thought? Napoleon hoped for his delivery from the political movements of Europe. If he had lived till 1830, perhaps he would have returned to us. But what would he have done among us? He would have seemed obsolete and out of date in the midst of the new ideas. Now his greatness would look like despotism to our littleness. In the present age, everything is decrepit in a day. Those who live too long die alive. As we advance in life, we leave 3 or 4 images of ourselves, each one different from the other. We see them afterwards in the haze of the past, like portraits of our different ages. Napoleon, weakened, no longer occupied himself except like a child. He amused himself by digging a little pond in his garden. He put a few fish into it. The mastic employed in cementing the pond contained copper, and the fish died. Napoleon said, "Everything that attaches itself to me is immediately struck down."